All right. Hello and welcome back to our last panel of Doing Good, Doing Well about education, titled How in the World Will We Learn Post-Pandemic? My name is Chris Caraggio. I'm a second-year MBA and a proud lifelong educator myself. This panel is about the fourth Sustainable Development Goal, which aims to provide a high quality and free education to children around the world. Now, on this topic of education, the Responsible Business Club has been working really hard to organize this conference, and we've made it free to all attendees. And for that reason, we actually wanted to redirect these funds to a meaningful cause. And on education. So we've partnered with the UN High Commission for Refugees, and 20 euros can provide a year's worth of education to women and girls around the world who don't have the access that we do today. So there's a QR code on the top right, and we'll provide a link, and we would really love for you to donate to an amazing cause. With that said, I am really excited to introduce our moderator for the evening. Her name is Julie Murat, and she is originally from France, but she has lived in China, India, Chile, Germany, and now she has moved to Spain to co-found and be the COO of Bridge for Billions. And Bridge for Billions is an organization that really is an ecosystem of entrepreneurship programs. And she really wants to democratize access and provide resources to entrepreneurs around the world. So with that, I present to you, Julie.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm so excited to be here. So in this panel about rethinking education, we will discuss how the pandemic has impacted and in many ways disrupted education around the world, and what changes we think will become, permanent as we enter a new normal. So today we have four amazing panelists who are ready to weigh in from the unique perspective. So I want to introduce you to our panelists. So first we have Andres Schleicher. So you're the Director for Education and Skills at the OECD in Paris, and you initiated and oversee the program for international student assessment, the PISA. And this created a global platform for policymakers, researchers, educators across nations to innovate and transform educational policies and practices. So thank you so much, Andres, for being here. And next we have Camila Achucci, the CEO and founder of Mastertech in Brazil. And Mastertech is a school of digital thought, agile, logic, and humans, as you describe it. And Camila, you work with companies like Google, Intel, Accenture. You're an expert in agile methodologies, emerging technologies, educational strategies. And I know you're also a member of Women 20, the United Nations Initiative on Diversity, Digital Inclusion, and Gender Equality. And also you're the creator of the Women in Computing portal. So it's one of the first initiatives for the inclusion of women in tech in Brazil. A lot of work to be done here. So thanks for being here as well. And next we have Christina Buana from Tanzania. And you're the COO and General Manager at Ubongo. It's a platform for edutainment, whose mission is to educate every child in Africa, a bold, big mission. And I know that having grown up in different countries, Christina, you consider yourself a citizen of the world. You have that passion for humanity, development, capacity building. And I know also there's a special place in your heart for kids, because you've worked on international campaigns on social issues ranging from anti-bullying, child trafficking, anti-poaching. And also you're a wise emerging leader fellow and the voice of Mama Akili. So again, thank you for joining us, Christina, for the discussion. And finally, we have Trent Fowler. So Trent, you're an author, you're a futurist, speaker, and machine learning engineer with years of experience in psychology and education. And I know that you co-host the Futurati podcast, which interview philosophers, technologists, poets, thinkers of all stripes to really try to better understand the forces shaping the world. So yes, such an exciting and diverse panel. And I wanted to start by getting the audience up to speed on how has this pandemic impacted education around the world. So I'm sure there are some parents watching right now who will know firsthand, and shout out to you what has happened in the last year. But I would really love to hear your unique perspective and related to your work in education. And I would love also to have this kind of local lens, you know, from the countries where you're based or in which you operate. So maybe we could start with Christina on this question of how has the pandemic impacted education?
Thank you, Julie. So I'm going to look at it from a very African perspective and maybe even hone it down closer to home, to Tanzania. I think from what I've seen in my experience with my nieces and nephews and other children that we're in contact with, it's really helped. On the bright side, it's really given different type of learners the opportunity to explore different learning styles, because the traditional setup in the public schools in Tanzania is very kind of the teacher writes on the board and you memorize it. For medium private schools, English medium schools, it's different. You know, you have a little bit more of a diverse teaching style, but I think everyone being at home has really helped, you know, learners to discover their own learning styles, because teachers have been forced to be creative in the homework they give, be creative in the platforms they use. And this in turn has allowed kids also to discover a new way of learning and to discover what they can do at home to also teach themselves, to also learn new things. So that's on the bright side. I think on the, unfortunately, on the, you know, the negative side, it's also caused a greater education gap between those children who can continue learning from home because they have access to technology, to internet, to electricity, and those who can't. So we've seen an even greater divide in the education gap between those, first of all, who, you know, are going to an English medium or private school and have all the facilities even at home, and then even those who are going to a government school and might have facilities at home, and those who have none at all. So unfortunately, it impacted them in the sense of they had no education for a while. I know in Tanzania, we only did home work schooling from home for a month or two before the government just brought everyone back to school. And right now, until today, like the kids are in school until 6 o'clock, like just trying to make up for those 2 months that they actually had no schooling, because you send them home, but they have no capacity to learn at home. So it's not just, you know, they were learning from home. It's like they were literally not learning for 2 months. So now they were in school until 6 o'clock to make up for those 2 months that they've missed. So that's kind of the negative impact that the pandemic has had on the education of children in Tanzania.
Completely. And I love how you mentioned the different learning styles, because it's true that some children, they learn, they're more in this mental space. They learn by analyzing, others, they learn by doing. They need to be very active physically. Yeah. Maybe they're more emotional, you know, they need to feel connected and meet new people. So it's
and
really
even
good
being able to talk out loud, to read their homework out loud, to process out loud, that's already like, now they're able to do that from home versus in the classroom where you're told to keep quiet if you do that, you know. So it's really helped in a way.
Completely. And maybe Andres, from a more policy perspective, could you share with us how the pandemic has impacted education globally?
Yeah, you know, clearly the impact has been massive. Now, the disruption has been massive. A year ago, you had 1.5 billion young people being locked out from their schools. Now. And I think, what, as Christina has said, the impact has been very polarizing. You know, if you had learned how to learn, if you know how to learn, if you had a very supportive ecosystem around, you know, parents included, if you had access to great, you know, technology, good digital learning system, maybe this experience has been liberating and exciting, you know, so much more interesting for many young people to learn in this way. But, you know, for the majority of people, they used to be spoon-fed by their teachers, and suddenly they didn't have access to their teachers. So they were left completely on their own devices. Or they didn't even have, you know, access to learning platforms, nor parents who had the time and energy and capability maybe to really engage in that. So that's been a really polarizing impact. Also, I think what the pandemic has also shown us, you know, on the one hand, we have seen enormous technological and social innovation, you know, probably more in the last 6 months than in 60 years before. But, you know, we've also learned that education is not just a transactional process. It's very much a relational, it's a social process, and that has got lost. And for many young people, particularly children from disadvantaged backgrounds, school is sometimes the most stable social environment, you know, the most predictable environment. And I think that is something that is going to be very hard to make up for. It's not just learning loss. It's really about that kind of learning experience. On the positive side, I hope really that we will not get back to the status quo when things return to normal, but that we will actually benefit from the positive experiences that we have seen. Greater connectivity among teachers, greater collaboration. Teachers, are no longer just instructors. They have become, good mentors, coaches, designers of innovative learning environments. We should keep that. The tech industry has really engaged with education. We should keep that. So, and in public policy as well, we have seen that the kind of industrial work organization in education is very vulnerable to external shocks. So I hope we're going to see a more professional work organization where education is more in the hands of people than in the hands of bureaucracy. So I hope we'll, learn those positive lessons as well.
Completely, and we'll have time to talk about the future and the trends that might stick. But again, coming back about the big shock from this year, maybe Camilla, you want to share with us also your perspective of what has been the impact of the pandemic on education?
Yeah, for sure. I'm speaking from Brazil, and we are the worst country in some analysis about how we found ways to fight against COVID. So here in Brazil, the big issue is about infrastructure. So we don't have enough distribution to just use a synchronous online education strategy, right? So we had more than 41 weeks without classes, without any discussion with teachers, mainly for public students. So here in Brazil, it's similar with the Christina situation. We have public and private education. And in the public perspective, we had just a lockdown of education. We leave 41 weeks of schools locked. So from my perspective, the big issue here is how we can find ways to distribute this technology. For example, Master Tech start to organize space to collect donations of computers, so we can help kids to find devices for a more comfortable learning journey, or to maybe start a learning journey. Just to give an idea, we have just 3% of our students with a computer dedicated for education. So 3% of the students were able to keep track of their own journeys. So for me, the big issue here is how we're gonna create this ecosystem. And I know we are going to discuss about future perspectives, but we need to help distribution, because it's not about scarcity of technology. We have enough money and devices to help education, but they are not well distributed, not at all. So this is one of my main questions right now here in Brazil. How are we going to spread this technology?
Completely. Trent, do you also want to share your perspective on the impact of this pandemic?
Absolutely. So speaking from the perspective of a person who is interested in the future, I think the single most obvious implication of the pandemic has been the way it has accelerated the digitization of work and life. So we've had Zoom, Google Hangouts, platforms for collaboration, and ways of learning in an asynchronous and distributed fashion for a long time. But all of that has gone into overdrive as a result of the lockdowns. And for the first time ever, huge fractions of our lives are conducted over the internet. And since so much of a child's life revolves around physically attending a school and interacting socially with their friends and with their teachers, they are as impacted as almost any other segment of the population, with possible exceptions like the very elderly. And this has been a very rough transition, with many schools struggling with low bandwidth or a lack of technical expertise among the staff, the difficulty of keeping students focused and motivated when they're sitting at home. But as Andreas mentioned, one of the hopeful trends that's kind of come out of all of this is that innovation in education has taken center stage. But we simply had no choice a year ago but to figure out how to get the wires hooked up so that we could all work and learn online. And whenever something, in this case, distance learning, becomes one of the 3 or 4 or 5 biggest problems in the world, you have a lot of really smart people trying to figure it out. And even if some of the energy and capital that's gone into this space fizzles out once the lockdowns are lifted, I think a lot of the advances are here to stay. And when you combine this with the ongoing effort of companies like Starlink to blanket the world in free high-speed internet, it's possible to imagine that we're living in the early stages of a digital-first renaissance in education. And 20 years from now, you might see smart kids from the poorest countries in the world log on to YouTube, teach themselves some technical skill like coding, put together a portfolio, and then make, get a job with a tech company making more money than anyone in their family has ever seen. And it's possible that we would have gotten there eventually, regardless. But I think that it's fair to say that COVID has accelerated all of that. And hopefully we'll see some amelioration of the education gap as a result of that.
Mm-hmm. And continuing on this topic of how the world has adapted, from all of your perspectives, how have different governments and especially businesses, we have business owners here in the call, adapted to the disruption of coronavirus as it relates to education? Maybe Andreas, you can provide a macro view on this one.
Sorry, I did not get that question very well.
So how have different governments and businesses adapted to all of those changes?
Yeah, it's difficult to judge, actually. It's been highly varied. If you are in Estonia, you have a lot of frontline capacity. I think the education systems that could rely on ingenuity at the front line, that had imaginative teachers, that had, school leaders with a lot of professional responsibility and a good collaborative culture. They were actually quite quickly, adopting new technologies, new solutions. They will be able to connect to students and parents. So in a way, it's not so much the kind of policymakers, but if you had an education system with a lot of, frontline capacity, you were quickly back on your feet. If you worked in a very hierarchical industrial bureaucracy, you had a very hard time to adjust. No? It's in a moment like this, if you want to achieve transformative change, don't ask yourself how well people follow your instruction. You ask yourself, how well can your people really collaborate? And actually, where that was well done, some of the Asian countries have done also very well. And I think a big differentiator was, what priority did education have in the COVID strategies of countries? I was actually quite saddened. Some countries in Europe here, the first thing they closed were the schools, and the last thing they reopened were the schools. That's not, the case in Asia, where actually schools were cherished, where, as far as possible, they were kept open, they were given priority. Teachers were cherished for their kind of social roles in this crisis. So I think, and that's something we should take really good note of. I think after this crisis, what are the ingredients to be resilient? Because, COVID was just a test. The future will always surprise us. We cannot anticipate the future, but we should become better at thinking in terms of alternative futures and to prepare ourselves, for alternative futures. And I do think if we don't learn this lesson, we're going to get harder lessons in the future now.
Completely. And I love what you shared it's about how well your citizens collaborate, because I think we see again this happening with the vaccines now. Like in Chile, they already vaccinated 16% of their population. What can we learn from them, So that's a very interesting point. And Camila, you shared before this crazy statistics that 97% of Brazilian kids did not have access to a device. And as a result, you started at Mastertech, trying to get donations of computers. How else has it impacted your business? How else did you react to the situation?
Yeah, perfect, Julie. Adaptation for us, we like to borrow the biology definition, right? It's about a change or a process of change by which an organization or a speech become better suited for an environment and not for a situation or a specific use. Here, we saw a lot of companies, NGOs, and states here in Brazil, in our country, just adapting their process for a situation and not learning how they become better. So for me, this is a really big issue. As Andrea said, we need to take lessons from this terrible moment that we are living right now. For us as a company, we have a really bad time because we saw a non-investment behavior. So the development, the personal development and the investments in education were reduced for more investments in infrastructure, which makes sense in a crisis. But if we stay in this state just trying to protect ourselves, it's going to be worse later. So for us, we found a really, we struggled the whole year to keep everything up and running. But what we found was a market much more prepared for collaboration without money, but trying to collaborate, sharing resources and trying to share people and strategies. So for example, for the doc, we found a lot of support from other companies to develop the whole idea. This social investment was not alternative earlier. So for us, it was a surprise to found a more prepared space for collaboration to produce this kind of innovation. So for it was good to see this, but for the results, we struggle to deliver in the pace that it should be. So we are living this strange moment of our history.
Completely, and it takes. Go
Julie,
ahead.
if I just may sort of come in, I can completely see Camila's point on, the lack of devices, but I also think, there's a lack of imagination. Of course, if you are in a country and you say, my students don't have devices, I can't do anything. But if you ask yourself, what do my students actually have? You will find probably many of them will have a mobile phone, all of them have a television. So, let's design learning environments around the resources that do exist. And I think we can achieve so much more. I was actually working with the mayor of Bogota in Colombia, and that's exactly what they did. And that's how they reached, over 90% of children. So I really think that's, for me, the bigger bottleneck, our lack of, imagination in this moment and our reliance on one solution that will not necessarily work in the short term.
And just to give an example, a tangible one, we used monitors, mouses, and keyboards from companies to distribute, because they were always working from home, so they have laptops and they leave like tons of monitors, keyboards, and mouses in the offices. So we pick everything and we use our doc to help kids to have a proper space to study with social distancing and everything. So how we can use our imagination, right, Andres, to redistribute everything. So for me, it was a surprise to see how people are wondering to put their own capacities to test these theses. Maybe we need to get advantage of the power of crisis, right? Maybe it's a good opportunity to try our imagination.
When it's too slow to change the structure, change the mindset. That's what I'm remembering from what you're saying. And yeah, I also thought when you said crisis and opportunity, Camila, how in Mandarin, the symbol for crisis, it means danger and opportunity. And I think that's really what you're saying in all of your discourses. And Christina, I'm very curious to hear, how has it been for you, Bongo?
So I think it's what Andres and Camila are saying. The most immediate response was collaboration, right? So from the broadcasters, government, suddenly everyone wanted, digital content they can put on TV, content they can put on YouTube or tablets or phones, whatever it is that kids can access at home. So the immediate response was like everyone was, let's get as much as possible this digital content that we can get to the kids who are working at home. So that was a great benefit also for Ubongo. You know, it really helped our business. And even with the funders, you know, funders responded overwhelmingly well in the pandemic. You know, they released funds quicker, you know, with less restrictions, you know, and just kind of more leeway to say, okay, great, you know, talk about this, talk about that. But I think on the flip side of that was that a lot of NGOs, from what I saw, kind of dropped other projects and focused all their funding, their grants into health and, you know, health topics and, you know, hygiene and all the things that surrounded the pandemic, which is, you know, great because that's where the funding was from. And suddenly everyone's MO changed, and you had NGOs who were never in the health field now suddenly shifting into the health field, which is great for the immediate response to the pandemic. But then what I've seen even now a year later is that other projects that were dropped are now also suffering, even though those projects are still needs. So you still have the basic needs of, you know, clean water, you still have the basic needs of, you know, hygiene for women, or education for women, or equal rights. So all of that, the funding was kind of siphoned away from that, and more projects came up to do with the immediate pandemic. So on one hand, yes, the response was immediate, great collaboration. On the other hand, what about now, a year later? Like, how are we dealing with the issues that the pandemic has brought to the surface? You know, the education gap, the lack of imagination, the basic needs that remain the same before or after the pandemic. You still have some needs that are still there. So that's kind of like, it was the pros and cons of the response. I know, for example, at Ubongo, we also, even before the pandemic hit, we had really started to think about the last mile child. You know, we have on every education, every tech platform, even the most basic phones, we have our content there through SMS or through calling in on IVR. But still there's the last mile child who might not even have a basic phone. So we had just started to think about how to get content to them. And then the pandemic hit, and we saw that 95% of NGOs and collaboration was leaning towards tech and towards availability of digital, and only maybe 1 or 2 out of those NGOs or, you know, governments were thinking or talking about, let's collaborate for the last mile child. Let's collaborate how we can get papers and pens and, you know, a screen, a donated screen to the child who is sitting at home having no idea what's going on because they have no access to anything. So it was really like an unfair balance, and it really pushed Ubongo to rethink our MO of like, how much time are we focusing on, yes, you know, promoting that like fun learning, education, edutainment versus, you know, being part of the problem of dividing the gap. So now we're not spending 100% on making education fun. We're spending 50% on one hand, making education fun, but on the other hand, getting education to the last mile child. So I think those are some of the ways that people have adapted. I really like what Andrea said, that it's not just about adapting to the moment, but it's, you know, once the pandemic, it's just a starter. The next thing will come up, you know, something else will come up. How are we learning how to be creative and flexible so that we're not stuck on just solving what's the pandemic, you know, the immediate results of the pandemic, but we're focusing on being creative to make sure that we're one step ahead of other issues that might come up in the education field. I think it's really taught us that there's definitely issues that will come up within education.
Completely. Yeah. And continuing this shift towards the future, Trent, maybe since you're futurist, what changes do you see or do you think will continue in the future of education? And especially, what's the role of technology there?
Right. So I don't have as much to add because most of what I've said so far has been about how business and technology have impacted education. But I would say that I agree with Andreas that there's no way definitively to pin down what the future will be like, but I do think we can make some broad comments. And first, I would say that if it wasn't clear before the pandemic that some things are better done in person, it's certainly clear now. All sorts of great tools have cropped up to help with tasks like whiteboarding or brainstorming, and these have filled a very desperate niche. But I'm sure I'm not alone in routinely wishing that I could break off into a room with other people to discuss a problem or try to generate new ideas for how to tackle some sort of issue. And so I think there's little doubt that offices and meeting rooms will be filling up once the lockdowns are lifted, to say nothing of restaurants, pubs, and theaters and places like that. And what's more, I think it's also driven home that living isn't just about keeping your heart beating. It's about having the freedom to be able to pursue hobbies and entertainment, to get fresh air, to get sunlight, meet with friends and loved ones. And all of this has been sorely missed over the past year. That having been said, I don't think there's any way to put the distance learning and remote working genies back in their respective bottles. Now that we've all seen that we can be productive working from home, I imagine that a sizable fraction of students and employees will continue with this present arrangement. And hopefully that'll mean less time lost in traffic, less crowded roads, less spent in expensive childcare and that sort of thing. And ideally, with the increased investment and attention in education and how important it is and how many people don't have it, the last mile children, we will see that momentum carried forward. Now that we all know this, now that we've seen how important it is, especially in times of crises, I hope that the innovation will continue and we will keep investing in building these tools so that anyone can access the internet, anyone can access the education that they need to build the futures that they deserve.
Completely. And from anyone else really in the panel, like what trends are here to stay from your perspective?
I think the trend on how the methods, I think there are plenty of opportunities. You put together, AI, big data, learning analytics. We're going to have a world where everybody can learn in their own kind of form and way. For me, the bigger question really after the pandemic is the what. I think what we are seeing very clearly is that the kind of things that are easy to teach and easy to test are also easy to digitize. They're disappearing so rapidly from our labor markets, our societies. Now the world no longer rewards you for what you know. Now Google knows everything, but for what you can do with what you know. That's a very big change and very big culture change to education. Artificial intelligence pushes us to think so much harder about what makes us human. In a way, our school systems have done well to educate second-class robots, people who are very good to repeat what you tell them. But, suddenly that's becoming relevant. Suddenly we need to think about, what is it that makes us human? And I think that's the question that I don't think gets very well asked these days. We all talk about the methods of education, how do we use technology for learning and so on. And I think that question is important, but the harder question to ask is, post-pandemic, what is the knowledge, the skills, the attitudes, the values that people will need? AI is a great amplifier, a great accelerator of what we do, but it amplifies good ideas and good practice in the same way it amplifies bad ideas and bad practice. So, your human capability to make that distinction is becoming so important. And I think we have really badly neglected that in education.
I think also
Completely, this resonates a lot. Christina, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was just gonna say what I hope will stick, post-COVID is the mindset that education can look different than what we're used to it looking like. Whether that's different learning style, different teaching style. I hope that teachers have really experienced a different way of teaching, also kids a different way of learning, whether it's governments rethinking, the emphasis they put on one system or one structure versus another. I really hope that mindset of, things can look different and different might be better. I hope that really sticks post-COVID.
Just to add, Julie, I feel families are more engaged on their kids' education. Here in Brazil, we had a crisis like, oh my God, I need to help my kid to finish the homework, or maybe I need to be with my kid to see a math class, to attend a math class. At first, it was a big deal, but now I feel, and I really hope it sticks, like after the pandemic, that families saw the importance of socialization, the importance of the teachers. For me, it's a little bit crazy to for here in Brazil, we have a big issue with teachers, and to be a teacher is not a well-recognized profession here in Brazil. So I really think that the whole country will think again about this mindset of education. It's about teachers and how education is important for their kids' lives. So I'm trying to reinforce this in my public speaking about parents and families. We have here an ecosystem and a really powerful ecosystem to self-educate our kids, to bring this more for non-formal education and take advantage of this. So I'm seeing a light by the end of the tunnel, using families to help us.
Completely. And I'm curious to ask all of you, maybe as a last quick question, and then we'll take the one from the audience. When you shared, Andres, about what makes us humans and what are the skills we need to develop in the years to come, for each of you, what would be the 1, 2, maybe 3 skills that you think will be critical in the decades to come for children?
Well, for me, I think it starts with imagination. Can we create and build things of intrinsic positive worth? The second question is, can you live with yourself? Can you live with other people who are different from you? Can you live with the planet? Our kind of being able to engage with the world, with other people, being able to navigate ambiguity. The world is no longer black and white. You need to sort of manage tensions and dilemmas. And then last but not least, can you mobilize your cognitive, social, and emotional resources? This idea of agency. We have made learners, passive recipients of knowledge. In the future, they need to take that ownership. They need to create, to build, and have that agency, and also the co-agency of working with others. I think that's something that, will require quite a different form of learning.
Beautiful.
I would also agree with Andreas. I think when a few years ago, we did a survey on skills or character strengths that are missing in kids, or that are low in kids in Tanzania. And it was, curiosity, grit, growth mindset, and purpose. Those were the things you don't really find in school kids here in Tanzania. And I think the pandemic and working from, schooling from home and all of the things that came with it has shown the importance of these, and even more the flexibility as a skill, whether it's flexibility for your environment, for your learning style, whatever it is, and agency and motivation. Because you have kids who are going to sit at home and try and learn from home with noise around them, no one to really support them, no one to say, you've spent 45 minutes focusing. So kids have to now learn for themselves how to motivate themselves and have that self agency and be flexible.
So imagination, collaboration, navigating change. Any other ones you can think of, Trent or Camilla?
Yes, we talk a lot about computational thinking, much more about how we can structure imagination and curiosity as a strategy to solve complex problems. So we use a lot input, processing, and output, and we can use this as a framework for our class, like what we already have, how we are going to process these resources to have an output that we want. So for me, help people to develop this computational thinking will help us to harvest digital and technology literacy. So for me, I'm going to stick with computational thinking.
Yeah, that's a very good one. And I want to build on some of what Andreas has said. There's a tendency sometimes to exaggerate the capabilities of machine learning algorithms or artificial intelligence. We're still a long way from automating all the humans out of jobs, but it is the case that these tools are becoming vastly more powerful at detecting signals, sorting signal from the noise, answering questions, and doing a wide range of tasks that only a few decades ago were the sole province of human beings. And so I think into the future, it will be more important to ask good questions. Not necessarily to generate an answer, because there might be 1,000 plausible answers, but to ask good questions, to interpret data, to interpret results, to act in ambiguity, to echo something that another panelist said, and to structure your own learning. Because again, as we move forward, I think that it's going to be less and less important that everyone master the same set of concepts or jump through the same hoops or take the same tests. Instead, it will be much more about individuating learning, teaching to specific weaknesses or to specific strengths, to reconfiguring curricula on the fly in order to accommodate an interest, that kind of thing. And so being able to sustain a motivation, knowing when to change a goal, reformulating a goal when it's appropriate, that kind of thing will be the meta skills that are a lot more important in education in the future.
Thank you, everyone. So we have almost 10 minutes to take some questions from the audience, and we already have some on screen. So I'm going to read them out loud, and whoever feels like answering can go.
Hey, Julie, I just wanted to step in really quick. We're going to probably close a little bit earlier than you said. So we'll probably have like 3-4 minutes. So probably one good question. So I'll just really quickly, like I see one here that I really like. Some of you were talking about some innovations and channels of how we were delivering education. And in addition to that, we want to think about different formats and content that we're really excited. And you all talked about different skills. So what are innovations and creations that you've seen that you're really excited about that you hope to see into the future? And these are like 30-second answers so that we can close out our conference on time.
I would say from what Ubongo does, I think the fun videos, music, SMSs, interactive SMSs, those are kind of the fun innovations and formats that I think kids would really benefit from, whether at home or in school. And I'm glad to see that schools are also already using it and at home also. So that's what I would say, kind of promoting Ubongo, but yeah.
I've been very impressed.
Sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Andres. No, it's okay.
I've been very impressed. There's technology for learners, but there's also technologies for teachers. And we have seen really amazing platforms emerging where teachers become knowledge creators and curators and actually, work together to work on really great kind of education material. I think there's a huge kind of potential for, this becoming the next driver of learning.
Yeah, just to add, we are using a lot the concept of circular education.